My name is Julia. I'm 32 years old, a communications coordinator at a small event planning company. And above all, I'm a single mother raising my 7-year-old daughter, Emily. My life is simple, honest, and quiet, three things that, apparently, have no value in the family I was born into. In my family, appearances have always been everything. My father, Stephen, spent his entire life climbing the corporate ladder until he retired as chief financial officer of a prestigious firm. He walks like he's still the man in charge, his words sharp and his standards unreachable. My mother, Caroline, built her entire identity around being the perfect wife to a perfect man. For her, family isn't about connection, it's about reputation. She hosts elaborate dinner parties, keeps photo albums meticulously arranged, and lives as if life itself is one long social presentation. Then there's Marcus, my older brother, the star, the pride, the perfect son. Marcus is now the CEO of a major real estate corporation, and in my parents' eyes, he is the living embodiment of success. His face appears in magazines, his speeches headline charity galas, and his opinions are treated like gospel at family gatherings. He shines so brightly that the rest of us are left to orbit him quietly, invisible by comparison. As for me, I was the quiet one, the polite disappointment at family dinners. I was the child they didn't quite know what to do with. I wasn't rebellious, I simply didn't fit the mold. I wasn't ambitious enough, glamorous enough, impressive enough. Every success I achieved was either dismissed as insignificant or attributed to luck. Every mistake I made was paraded as proof that I wasn't one of them. I tried, for years, to win their approval. I went to family reunions I didn't want to attend. I dressed the way they expected. I laughed at the right moments. I let them belittle my work, my choices, my quiet life. I told myself that keeping the peace was worth more than being seen, that being tolerated was the closest I would get to being accepted. Then Emily was born, and everything changed. Emily doesn't know how to make herself small. She sings in the middle of grocery stores. She asks bold questions at the dinner table. She takes up space in a way I never dared to. I promised myself I would never let her feel the loneliness I grew up with. I promised she would know that her voice mattered. But some promises are harder to keep than others. The breaking point came at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a lavish celebration in a 5-star hotel ballroom, filled with wealthy guests, glittering lights, and a family image that had to be protected at all costs. I went to that party believing I could handle it. I thought I had learned how to navigate their world without letting it touch my daughter. I was wrong. I thought I could protect Emily from the quiet violence that had shaped my life. But I underestimated the depth of my family's indifference. I believed I could shield her simply by being present, by standing next to her. I was wrong. The celebration was extravagant, as expected. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed table settings, and carefully arranged flower displays. Waiters floated between tables carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My parents had spared no expense. This wasn't just a party, it was a performance, a staged display of family unity and accomplishment. Emily had been buzzing with excitement since we arrived. She wore a pale yellow dress with tiny embroidered flowers, her hair tied up in a loose ponytail that bobbed every time she skipped across the marble floor. She didn't know this world wasn't built for her. She didn't understand the rules of silence, of shrinking, of making yourself small to keep the peace. She only knew she wanted to sing. I watched her from our table as she hummed quietly, rehearsing a little song she'd prepared. "I want to sing for Grandma and Grandpa," she whispered to me. "It's their special day." A part of me hesitated. I knew how fragile the family's image was. I knew Marcus's business partners were here, along with old family friends and powerful acquaintances. I knew how little patience they had for anything unscripted. But looking at Emily's eager face, I couldn't bring myself to say no. She deserved to be heard. "Okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "Just wait for the right moment." That moment came sooner than I expected. After the toasts and speeches, the music softened, and the room settled into light conversation. Emily slipped away from my side, walked confidently to the front of the room, and with the microphone trembling slightly in her small hands, she began to sing. Her voice, though young and untrained, was sweet and clear. It soared through the room, cutting across the clinking of glasses in low murmurs. She sang a simple song about family, love, and belonging, the kind of song that would make most parents beam with pride. But not mine. From across the room, I saw Marcus stiffen. He was in the middle of a conversation with a city councilman and a group of potential investors. His jaw tightened as Emily's voice rose, drawing more and more attention away from him. His grip on his wine glass hardened, his knuckles turning white. I tried to catch his eye, to signal to him to let it go. But he wasn't looking at me. He was watching Emily with something I'd never seen before, disdain mixed with calculation. As Emily sang, the atmosphere began to shift. Some guests smiled warmly, others watched with polite curiosity, but Marcus's annoyance radiated like a storm-gathering force. He turned to one of his assistants, said something quickly, then pushed back his chair with an audible scrape against the floor. I knew then that something was about to happen, but I was still 2 tables away. He crossed the room in quick, heavy steps. Emily finished the final line of her song, smiling proudly, oblivious to the tension thickening behind her. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward, towering over her small frame. "Enough," he snapped, his voice cutting like glass. Emily blinked up at him, confused. Uncle Marcus, the sound of his palms striking her cheek cracked through the room like a gunshot. Emily stumbled backward, the microphone slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. Silence fell instantly. Conversations died. Music stopped. Forks were left suspended in midair. Emily's wide, tear-filled eyes searched the room, searching for me, for someone, anyone, to make sense of what had just happened. I was already running to her. Marcus's voice, cold and dismissive, filled the silence. Children need to learn their place. My father's laughter broke the pause. Finally, someone taught her some manners. My mother's soft chuckle followed, as if Emily's pain was nothing more than an awkward family joke. I gathered Emily into my arms. Her cheek was flushed red where his hand had landed. Her small body trembled as she buried her face against my shoulder. "What's wrong with you?" I hissed at Marcus, unable to control the tremble in my voice. "She was out of line," he said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had happened. "If you can't control your child, I will." I wanted to scream, to fight, but something held me still. Then, through the corner of my eye, I saw Peter, my uncle, standing by his video camera. His face was pale, his hands frozen on the equipment. Slowly, his eyes met mine, and I realized he had captured everything: the slap, the words, the laughter, the humiliation. The camera had recorded it all. Marcus seemed to notice Peter too, because for the first time that evening, a flicker of unease passed across his face. But I didn't say another word. I simply turned, holding Emily tight, and walked out of that glittering room. Something had broken that night, something that would never be put back together. I walked out of that glittering ballroom holding Emily close, her small body shaking against my chest, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. There was no repairing the facade, no pretending this family was something it had never been. If I stayed silent this time, I would lose Emily not physically, but I would lose the light in her, the belief that her voice deserved to be heard, and I had promised I would never let that happen. The cold night air outside the hotel wrapped around us as I hurried to the car. Emily's sobs had softened into quiet hiccups, her arms clinging tightly around my neck. I gently settled her into the back seat, fastening her seatbelt as she wiped her tears with the sleeve of her dress. "Mommy, was I bad?" she whispered. her voice so fragile it almost broke me. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly, brushing her hair away from her tear-streaked face. "You were brave. You were perfect. Uncle Marcus was wrong. He should never have touched you." But Grandpa laughed. She said, "Confused," and Grandma didn't stop him. I swallowed the burn in my throat. "Sometimes adults do the wrong thing," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "But that doesn't mean you did. It just means they don't understand what it means to love properly." Emily didn't say anything after that. She leaned against the window, watching the lights blur as I drove us home, her silence settling like a weight in the car. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I promised her I would make it right. She was asleep within minutes, her exhaustion too heavy to fight. I sat alone in the living room, numb, replaying the scene over and over in my head until a soft knock pulled me out of my spiral. When I opened the door, Uncle Peter stood there, his expression grim but resolute. He handed me a small USB drive without a word, just a quiet nod of understanding. "You might need this," he finally said. "I didn't stop it, but I can at least make sure it's not erased." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight with gratitude and something else, something that felt like the first flicker of strength I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Peter hesitated on the porch. "Julia, they're going to try to bury this. Just be ready." I nodded. I already was. By morning, the phone calls had started. First my mother, her voice smooth but laced with irritation. "It was a misunderstanding. You know how Marcus is. He didn't mean it. Let's not blow this out of proportion." Then my father, "You're overreacting. Julia, you always have. We can sort this out quietly. There's no need to make this a public spectacle." Each message was a careful dance between pressure and guilt. The unspoken command was clear: protect the family's image, or be cut off. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted quickly. Marcus's messages came next, sharp, aggressive, threatening. "If you take this any further, I'll make sure your precious little career is over. I know people. Don't be stupid." But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't that silent shadow in the corner of family photos. I wasn't the girl who apologized for existing. This time, I wouldn't beg to be heard. I spent the day replaying the recording Peter had given me, listening to every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. The slap echoed through the speakers like a bullet. It wasn't just about that moment. It was about every time they had made me feel small, every time they had told me to sit down, be quiet, stay in my place. I realized I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to plead my case. I had the truth, captured plainly, and I would let the truth speak for itself. So, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue with them. I wouldn't engage in the endless cycle of manipulation. I would simply act. I began researching the company where Marcus held his pristine title as CEO, the firm that marketed itself on community values and family ethics. I looked into the children's charity where he served as a public ambassador. I made a list of names, of decision-makers, of people who would care about what kind of man represented their brand. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. They had spent a lifetime telling me to be quiet. But now, silence was no longer an option. I would not let Emily believe that power excuses cruelty. I would not let her grow up thinking that her worth could be slapped out of her. That night, as I stood by her bedside and watched her sleep, I made another silent promise this time. I would not fail her. I would not protect the image of this family at the expense of her safety or her voice. The lines had been drawn. I knew there was no going back, and I didn't want to. There was no going back, and for the first time, I didn't want to. I had crossed a line the family had drawn long ago, an invisible boundary of silence and submission. But I had no intention of retreating. I wasn't just defending myself now. I was fighting for Emily, for her right to be heard, to be safe, and to know that her mother would always stand in front of her. I didn't rush. I knew this battle wouldn't be won with angry phone calls or dramatic confrontations. It would be won in quiet, strategic moves precise, irreversible actions that couldn't be smoothed over or explained away. I spent the next few days carefully preparing. I compiled all the evidence, the full video Peter had given me, the audio with Marcus's words, my father's cruel laughter, my mother's cold amusement. I didn't need to add commentary. The recording spoke for itself. My first step was contacting the board of directors at Marcus's company. His profile was everywhere, glossy brochures, company websites, press releases. Marcus had carefully built himself as a figure of trust, a man of integrity, the polished face of a corporation that prided itself on community values and family ethics. I composed a simple email. I attached the video clip, trimmed only to the essentials, the moment of the slap, the cruel words, the laughter, nothing else, no embellishment, no threats, just the raw truth. In the message, I wrote, "I believe you should be aware of this incident involving your chief executive officer, Marcus. His actions are directly contradictory to the ethical image your company presents to the public. I trust you will handle this in accordance with your stated values." Then I hit send. My next step was the children's charity, where Marcus served as an ambassador, a position he had proudly flaunted at countless family dinners. The organization specialized in child welfare, in protecting vulnerable children. I sent the same video to their leadership team, along with a brief note. "I thought you would want to be aware that your public representative has recently been involved in an incident that fundamentally conflicts with your mission of protecting children's well-being." Finally, I contacted the parents' network at Emily's school, forwarding the same video to key members of the PTA and a local group that advocated for children's safety in our community. There was no malice in what I was doing, no desire for revenge, only the unwavering belief that people deserved to know who they were trusting with power, influence, and their children's futures. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, not even Peter. I simply waited. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, my phone began to buzz relentlessly. First came the terse, professional email from Marcus's company, informing him that he had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. His face disappeared from their website the next morning. The charity acted even faster. They released a public statement less than a day later, thanking Marcus for his past contributions, but announcing that he would no longer serve as an ambassador, effective immediately, citing their zero-tolerance policy on child welfare violations. The wave built quickly. Soon, whispers reached his professional circles, then his social ones. His meticulously crafted image unraveled in real time. The man who had once held the room with his polished charisma was now under scrutiny from all directions. That's when the next phase began, the family's counterattack. They came at me with every weapon they had. My mother called mutual relatives, spreading the narrative that I was unstable, that I was suffering from post-divorce depression, that I was fabricating the entire incident out of spite and jealousy toward Marcus's success. My father made quiet calls to anyone he thought would listen, telling them I had always exaggerated, that I was creating unnecessary drama to seek attention. Marcus, predictably, escalated. His messages turned from threats to manipulation, pleading with me to retract the emails, to issue a public clarification, to claim it had been a misunderstanding. "You don't understand the damage you've done," he wrote. "You've ruined my reputation, my career, my life. For what a slap, as if it were so small, as if Emily's tears and humiliation were an acceptable price to pay for his convenience." I didn't respond. They couldn't reach me anymore. I had prepared for their games, their guilt trips, their subtle intimidation. I had already insulated myself. I spoke to Emily's school administrators, informed my employer, and made sure my closest friends were aware of the full story, including the video. No one could touch me now. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their support. And I no longer needed to explain myself. They had expected me to cave. They had expected me to protect the family's image as I always had. But this time, I had chosen to protect Emily. I had chosen to protect myself. And there was no turning back. I thought they couldn't touch me anymore. but I had underestimated just how far the family would go to protect the version of themselves they wanted the world to see. They weren't just fighting to defend Marcus, they were fighting to preserve the carefully built illusion that had defined our family for generations. And then came the unexpected call. My grandmother, Sylvia. She had always stayed neutral, a quiet observer who never openly took sides. I grew up thinking she existed somewhere above the family's petty battles, detached and unbothered, but this time, she wanted answers. "We're having a family meeting," she said simply. "Sunday, 2 o'clock. I expect you to be there." Her voice left no room for negotiation. She wasn't asking. She was summoning me. When I arrived at her home, a sprawling Victorian house that had hosted countless birthdays, anniversaries, and sterile family gatherings, the atmosphere was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The usual hum of small talk was gone. The room was heavy with silence, with unspoken accusations and poorly hidden fear. My parents sat side by side, their expressions stiff and defensive. Marcus leaned against the mantel, his face tight with exhaustion and rage barely held in check. Sophia, his wife, sat alone by the window, her gaze distant, her wedding ring spinning slowly on her finger. Uncle Peter was already there, seated with his camera bag resting by his chair. He gave me a small nod when I walked in, a quiet sign that we were still on the same side. The rest of the family, my aunts, uncles, cousins filled the remaining chairs, their faces wary, their loyalties uncertain. Sylvia entered last, moving slowly but with undeniable authority. Her cane tapped against the wooden floor, commanding attention with each step. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, surveying all of us. "I've lived long enough to see 5 generations of this family," she began, her voice steady and cold, "and I have never been more disappointed than I am today." My father straightened, prepared to defend himself. "Mother, if you just listen to be quiet." "Stephen," she snapped, silencing him instantly. "I'm not here to hear your excuses." She turned to Peter. "Show us." Without a word, Peter connected his laptop to the television in the corner and played the video. The room filled with the sound of Emily's innocent singing, her sweet voice rising in the middle of the celebration. Then the crack of the slap, loud, sharp, undeniable. The silence that followed. Marcus's cold words. My father's laughter. My mother's soft chuckle. When the video ended, there was no air left in the room. Sylvia turned her gaze to Marcus. "You struck a child," she said. Each word weighted. "And then you insulted her and her mother. Your behavior was inexcusable." Marcus's jaw clenched. "It wasn't that hard of a slap. Everyone's overreacting. Be silent," Sylvia commanded, her voice cutting through the space like a blade. "When a grown man hits a child, the force is irrelevant. What matters is the betrayal, the abuse of trust." She pivoted to face my parents. "And you two, what you did was worse. You laughed. You encouraged it. You defended it." My mother's composure began to crack. "Mother, you don't understand. Julia has always been difficult. She exaggerates." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "I raised your husband. I know where this behavior came from." My father paled but said nothing. "You've allowed Marcus to walk through life without consequences because he made you proud in public. But pride built on cruelty is nothing but rot beneath polished wood." The silence was suffocating. Then, something I never expected. Cousin Daniel, sitting quietly in the corner, cleared his throat. "I've seen Marcus get aggressive before," he said softly. "At last year's family picnic. He twisted my son's arm because he wouldn't stop drumming on the table. I didn't speak up because, well, we all know how things are." Another cousin, Lisa, added, "When I was 12, Marcus pushed me so hard I hit the ground. No one believed me when I said he did it on purpose." Uncle Richard looked down, ashamed. I saw him shove a coworker at a charity golf event. I didn't intervene. I told myself it wasn't my place. Piece by piece, the truth began to unravel, and with each revelation, Marcus's control over the narrative slipped further away. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice steady but cold. "I'm separating from him." Marcus turned, stunned. "What I've ignored his temper at home for years." She continued, but hearing what he said to Emily, watching how he acted, I realized where our marriage was heading. I won't wait for it to escalate. My mother's panic was immediate. "Sophia, every marriage has its struggles. You can't throw it all away over this." Sophia looked her dead in the eye. "It's not just this. It's everything. It's a pattern. I just refused to see it until now." Sylvia's voice softened, but her words landed like iron. "This family now stands at a crossroads. We can either continue covering for cruelty, or we can begin to change." For the first time in my life, I saw my family fracture not along bloodlines, but along the line of what was right and what was convenient. And I knew exactly where I stood. The fracture that began in my grandmother's living room never truly healed, and I no longer expected it to. The family would never return to what it was before. But maybe that wasn't a loss. Maybe it was finally the beginning of something honest. The consequences for Marcus unfolded quickly. His company's investigation concluded with a sharp and public demotion, stripping him of his title and removing him from client-facing roles. He became a ghost in his own organization, tucked away in a quiet office where no cameras followed, no articles featured him, and no handshakes awaited him at charity galas. The children's charity severed ties officially, releasing a statement that echoed in social circles much louder than he expected. Invitations stopped arriving. Business contacts disappeared quietly. His name, once spoken with admiration, became something people avoided mentioning altogether. For someone like Marcus, who had lived off his image, it was a slow kind of erasure, a disappearance he could feel in the cold stares, the unanswered calls, the empty seats around him. As his world shrank, mine quietly expanded. I had never planned to stay in my old position, but I hadn't dared to hope for more either. I thought I'd always be the quiet, reliable employee tucked into the background. But something had changed in me. When a project management role opened at my company, I applied something the old version of myself would have convinced herself she wasn't ready for. I walked into the interview calm, steady, sure of who I was. I didn't rehearse ways to make myself smaller, less threatening, more agreeable. I told the truth. A week later, the offer arrived. The pay increase meant I no longer needed to worry about the thin line between rent and groceries. I no longer needed to answer my parents' conditional offers of help. The last lever of their control dissolved quietly. Emily thrived in this new space we had built together. She began singing again, first in soft hums around our apartment, then in louder, brighter bursts that filled the rooms. When she asked to join the children's music club at the community center, I saw a spark in her eyes that had dimmed since the night of the party. She sang with a confidence I had never known at her age. Our home became something I had never experienced, growing up a place where joy was safe, where a child could take up space without fear of being silenced. The family, sensing the growing distance, made several attempts to reconnect. My mother called often, carefully avoiding the subject that now defined us. My father sent emails, dressing his regret in passive language, always circling the issue without naming it. They agreed, reluctantly, to participate in family counseling after multiple failed invitations. But I no longer played by their terms. Any contact with Emily happened under strict supervision. They would not have unrestricted access to her. Not again. This time, I would not allow history to repeat itself. And slowly, I built something I had once thought impossible. A new family, friends like Peter, who had never stopped standing beside me, neighbors who became more like siblings, and other single parents I met in support groups who understood that family is not a matter of blood, but of choice. We gathered for birthdays, for quiet dinners, for music recitals, each one threading itself into a life where respect was given freely, where love didn't have to be earned by shrinking. Emily's world was now filled with people who cheered for her voice, not ones who tried to silence it. 6 months after the night that had changed everything, I watched Emily step onto a small stage at her music club's recital. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back, her face glowing with the kind of joy that cannot be forced. When she sang, I felt the weight of all those silences I had carried finally lift. Her voice was clear, unshaken, unapologetic. She was free. After the recital, I stood by the window, watching her laugh with her friends, her hand tucked in mine. My mother arrived late, standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. She looked at Emily, her gaze soft, perhaps for the first time seeing her as she was, not as someone to correct or contain. She approached carefully. "She has a beautiful voice," she said, almost a whisper. "Yes," I answered, my tone even. "She always has." There was nothing more to say. No apologies would ever rewrite what had been done. No invitation could undo what I had learned to protect. Some distances are not meant to be closed. I no longer needed to prove anything to them, to myself, to anyone. The worth I had searched for all my life was never theirs to give, and I was done asking for it. As I gathered Emily's bag and stepped toward the door, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my bones, a knowing that some chapters don't need to be revisited, some doors don't need to be left ajar. Without hesitation, I stepped outside, closed the door firmly behind me, and kept walking. Because true worth does not require anyone's permission, and dignity can never be taken, it can only be surrendered. I choose to carry mine forward,